Welcome to Ridgecrest Talk. I'm your host, Tonia Pyle, where we get to talk to people in the community about things going on in and around Ridgecrest. In this case today, our guest is Bart Parker, back with us. We're from Randsburg, curator of the Randsburg Museum, and quite a historian of the fascinating area of Randsburg. And you're gearing up right now for the Old West Days.
That's right. Saturday, September 19th.
Okay, coming right up.
Celebrating Old West Days, and we'll have a number of activities. Of course, we have a band that plays all day long.
Very nice.
And there are different bands.
Okay.
I could read.
Oh, yes. Go right ahead.
Off this, Steve Hill, who has 5 BMI awards and 4 #1 hits, will appear at 3 p.m., along with the steel guitar great Vern Monette, award-winning bass player Craig Watson, and local drummer Norm Davis. Dravis is that. Also performing with will be Mark McAdams, an all-star band, Walden Dahl and his bluegrass band, Dean West singing the best of Waylon Jennings, and Don Pryor. Kern County's Old West lawmen will be there to show us how the West was kept safe from outlaws. There will be dancing and...
Now, are these bands going to be at the park?
They will be right across from the museum to the right.
Okay, I kind of call that the park area, yeah. So it's adjacent, the museum.
No, the park is on the same side of the street as the museum. The band will be across the street.
Oh, they'll inside then. They're going to be.
No, there's a big empty.
Oh, is that
lot
an empty
area
okay.
there?
Okay.
That.
They'll be there, and they'll be dancing there, and
Yeah.
and a lot going on.
Yeah,
I enjoyed
there's
that.
an old car show up the street.
Okay.
And there will be food vendors, antiques, arts, crafts, collectibles, and other unique items for sale up and down the street. So
That's
free admission, and we all have a good time. So.
Coming right up again,
Yep.
September 19th, and so you mentioned about the lawmen, and when I was there the other day, I picked this neat photo up at the general store, and it's quite a photo. It's I mean, Wyatt Earp, Teddy Roosevelt,
Butch
Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's got the judge there.
And Doc Holliday.
Oh, yeah, Doc Holliday. I mean, when I walked into the general store, I felt like I was going to see Miss Kitty walk in anytime, which, of course, that's I remember from the days of Gunsmoke on TV. Yeah. But it does give you that feeling. But it's quite an interesting area, to say the least. But I wanted to have you back. You visited with us just about a month ago, and I wanted you to talk a little bit more about some of the issues that required. We were talking about law enforcement in particular, and the fact that the citizenry there, the community, wanted to start their own vigilante group because they felt it was necessary.
Well, they had one deputy sheriff in town, and they had the county had appointed one town constable, but that was, two guys to handle 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they both owned a saloon to run besides.
So they were busy.
They were busy, so the citizens formed the Citizens Committee, which in essence was a vigilante committee.
You said there was, brawling going on just because of the saloons, wine and beer creates a lot of brawling, mocking and brawling going on.
Yeah.
So they had problems.
And water was scarce up there in those days, so they drank a lot of beer.
Okay. And that explains a lot of it too, actually. But also there was domestic violence.
There was domestic violence. There was one.
These people actually lived in tents.
Yeah.
But they came, of course, this is the area of the gold rush, and this is a lot of minerals in Randsburg, gold and silver, not to mention the, what was the one
Tungsten.
Tungsten that strengthened the steel. So a lot of people rushed to Randsburg.
Yeah.
But they came in groups of about, what, you said it was 1,500 to 3,900 at some point?
Yeah, at different times. I've seen different figures, but an average of about 2,500 people in town.
And so they got into claim jumping and
lot jumping.
lot jumping.
The lots in town were selling for what is equivalent to $10,000 in today's money. And
so that seems like it would be pretty pricey at the time.
And, you know, people were moving in on the lots that didn't belong to them and just taking over. And then
the lawmen got busy.
Yeah, the claims, the mining claims, guys would go out and find an area that they thought had gold in it and stake a claim, and somebody would come along and move in on them and force them off by gunpoint. And so they needed more law enforcement than was provided. So they formed the vigilante committee, and they would quietly invite these guys that caused problems to leave town.
Well, I want to look at some of the artifacts you brought when we're going to be back in a brief moment after we take a little break. But you showed me at the museum a wedding certificate. So this is quite interesting.
A very
artifacts.
beautiful wedding certificate from 1904, I believe is the date on it.
So we'll take a little break, and we'll come back, and then we'll take a closer look at some of these artifacts. Welcome back to Ridgecrest Talk with our guest, Bart Parker, curator of the Randsburg Museum and historian. So now you brought with you this interesting little artifact here from the museum, which I thought was fascinating, and it's a lantern they used in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and it's a Union Carbide lantern. Explain to us how that worked and how they used it in the mines.
Yeah, this is a carbide lantern, and it works by putting the carbide in the base of it and water up in the top. And the water drips down into the carbide, combines with the carbide, and creates a acetylene gas, which comes out here. And there's a little striker here that had a flint in it. For those of you that remember the old cigarette lighters with flints, this was the same thing. You hit that and it sparks and starts the light, the fire, and then it reflects off the reflector here to light up the mine. This size of lamp was used to hang in the mine to light the whole room. They had smaller ones that are all about a third of this size that they wore on their caps. So when they were walking down the tunnels and whatnot, they could see where they were going.
Interesting. It's a neat little gadget. Carbide. Wow, I'll have to Google that. I don't even know what carbide is. So some kind of chemical that with water produced acetylene gas.
Same stuff you used to weld with.
Interesting. So then I thought this was neat. You unearthed this. You said this was unearthed on your property, and
Yeah,
Dr.
I found this with a metal detector when they were building the
Allingham.
park,
Mm-hmm.
and it says on it, Dr. Allingham. And Dr. Allingham was in town in 1902 when they had the big breakout of smallpox. And before that, he'd been a doctor up in Big Pine, California.
Oh.
And
So he was sort of generally from the area, sort of.
yeah. Anyway,
These were.
you read a little of this. It says, in the early years of Randsburg and the Rand mining district, there were quite a few doctors who practiced medicine. Dr. McDonald and Dr. Denton being those most written about, and in more recent years, Dr. Drummond, who later founded the hospital in Ridgecrest.
And of course, that's the Drummond Boulevard here in Ridgecrest, or Avenue.
Yeah. Among the numerous other doctors who hung their shingle out in the district was a doctor by the name of Dr. Allingham. We first became aware of Dr. Allingham's existence in Randsburg a number of years ago when the sign was unearthed from the construction of the park adjacent to the museum. Several years later, while researching the 1900 census for Inyo County, we found Dr. Allingham listed as a physician in Big Pine. Shortly thereafter, his name came up in a list of headstones at the Johannesburg Cemetery, showing he had been buried there in 1902. This raised the question as to whether he had passed as a result of smallpox, which had ravaged the population of Randsburg in early 1902. A partial answer was found in the Inyo Independent newspaper of January 31st, 1901, in which the following article appeared. Dr. Allingham's dead. Dr. Allingham died at Randsburg at 8:30 a.m. Wednesday. J.C. Baxter. The above telegram was received here yesterday morning. Dr. Allingham was well known here, having practiced in several towns in the valley. He had consumption for many years, and his death was probably caused by the dread illness. The article goes on to say that they couldn't. It wasn't really determined whether he died of consumption or smallpox. It wasn't clear on that in the article.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to the Hall of Records in Bakersfield to try and find his death certificate, but no death certificate exists for him over there, which is not unusual in the fact that this was a time of great stress in the town. The town was quarantined, people weren't allowed in and out.
Because of the disease.
Yeah, because of the disease.
The smallpox.
So the paperwork may have got overlooked in that case. So we're still not clear of whether Dr. Allingham died of the consumption, which was tuberculosis, or if he worked himself to death during the smallpox. Epidemic. We like to think that he did, that he's a hero, you know, that gave his life serving the people of Randsburg.
Well, and this is what doctors pretty much were in those days.
Yeah.
They were heroes, and they worked. It was a very different sort of experience than doctors today. I mean, just a different situation.
It was for
Just
everybody.
very different.
It was
Everybody.
awful, rough and tumble, and
Before the
just-
vaccinations,
Yeah,
so
and they just didn't have the technology that we have today.
they didn't have the vaccinations.
A lot of guesswork.
Right, in how to treat it.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people were shy about nursing
Yeah.
the people, actually, or
Oh, yeah,
giving
and
them
our-
treatment.
Our ladies of the evening were the best nurses in town. They stepped forward during
They-
the smallpox epidemic
Yes.
and did most of the nursing.
It's quite a history of that fact.
Real.
It's quite a history of that fact.
Yeah.
So it's worth noting that they stepped forward to take care of men where the nurses were shy to go forward. But well, we're going to take a little break, and we'll come back and talk about some of the other characters involved at Randsburg. It is really a fascinating place, and so we're looking forward to talking about the Old West days. We'll be right back after this brief break. Welcome back to Ridgecrest Talk with our guest, Bart Parker, the curator of the Randsburg Museum. And gearing up for the Old West days, I made a trip out to Randsburg. I had to stop at the Visitors Bureau, and Debbie there had to literally draw me a map. She kept saying, "It's just not hard, Tonia." But it's kind of there's not a lot between here and there,
No.
except desert and mountains. So you reminded me of a quote, though, someone had posted on my Facebook page of Annie Oakley. I hope I get this right. She said, "I'm not afraid to love a man. I'm not afraid to shoot him either." And it made me think, because you were telling how different it is nowadays, of course, than it was in terms of justice and things of that nature when it came to domestic situations. So fill me in again. And I guess this woman was one that brought it to mind, Florence Ann Monahan.
We mentioned earlier the beautiful wedding certificate that we have hanging on the wall up there. And it was up there quite a few years before we realized what it really signified.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to researching the story behind it, and it seems that Florence Ann Monahan, who was the ex-wife of Joe Monahan, the owner of the Desert Queen Saloon, married John Henry Arnold on 10 July in 1904. Well, John Arnold was the town constable. John Arnold seems to have had a taste for other men's wives, and as in June of 1899, he was shot and severely wounded by Wendy Waltman, who was John's partner in a mining venture about 10 miles out of Randsburg.
And Wendy, that would have been like old Wendy, like full of wind. Not today we think of Wendy as a girl's name, but this was a guy.
Yeah.
This wasn't a woman.
The blowhard.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that John and Arnold and Wendy and a lady who was purportedly Wendy's wife had been living in the same tent, and Wendy got the idea that John was paying a bit too close attention to the lady when the two of them were down in the mine. Wendy and John quarreled, and the next day, while they were headed into Johannesburg, they stopped at the Golden Flame mine, where Wendy got hold of a pistol. The lady warned Arnold, who armed himself with a rock, and when Wendy took a shot over Arnold's head, he threw the rock at Wendy and then grappled with him. During the ensuing scuffle, 2 more shots were fired, and Arnold took a ball in the lungs, where it stayed. Wendy then went on into Johannesburg to get help for Arnold and to give himself up. John Arnold was 26 years old at the time of the shooting and came from Randsburg, from Exeter, California, where he did not have a good reputation. Mr. Arnold had kept a saloon in Exeter and was married to the daughter of Giles Kane of Exeter, who, by the way, ran John out of town for messing around. John recovered, but seems to have lost his wife, the one in Exeter. Wendy got hold of his wife back and some time in jail. Having lost both his wife and Wendy's wife, John apparently went hunting for another wife, and in 1904 he married Joe Monahan's wife. Whether he was the cause of her becoming an ex-wife is unknown. J.H. Arnold later was shot and killed by Jack Harris, an owner of the Alameda Saloon in Johannesburg. This shooting was done by Jack Harrison's gun, and several people heard Wendy state at the time of the shooting, "You shot me, Jack." That would have been, reads wrong. Would have been Arnold saying, "Hey, you shot me, Jack." The shooting was done by Jack Harrison's gun, and the coroner's jury, however, ruled that the shooting was at the hand of an unknown party. And later, when challenged by Arnold's wife, they ruled it an accidental shooting. One wonders if maybe John's attraction to other men's wives may not have had something to do with the shooting. It would not have been out of place at the time for a coroner's jury or a judge who knew that a man was fooling with another man's wife to have so ruled. Justice was not as blind in those days as it is now.
And so that's what you were telling me, that it was very different. That if somebody messed with a man's wife, the guns started. They started pulling guns.
Yeah, one of our later marshals, constables in town, had also lived up in Big Pine, where he had shot and killed his neighbor because his neighbor was fooling with his
It
wife.
was the Wild West.
Yeah, and they found him not guilty, and they later made him constable of Randsburg. Yeah.
Interesting.
And
Well, and as you drive through Randsburg, there are quite a few churches, some very old that have been there since the turn of from the 19th century to the and so it still had the values of that we think of as our American principles and values, and yet things got out of hand because
churches and schools, but there was that wild side to it too.
And how many saloons did you say there were at one point? 20-some saloons?
21 saloons in 1897 in the town of Randsburg.
Very interesting. Well, your Old West days are always a big hit, and you're gearing up for those. And
don't forget to come to the breakfast. We have a pancake breakfast from 8 in the morning to 11 in the afternoon at the Opera House.
Saturday the 19th?
Saturday the 19th.
At the Opera House.
Yeah, and that's how we make money for the museum. So come by and have breakfast with us.
Sounds good. Pancake breakfast.
Pancake, sausage.
Okay. Well, that sounds very good. Well, I want to thank you so much for venturing over here from Randsburg to join us, and
I want to thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Welcome.
Interesting
Have
area.
me back anytime.
Thank you. Will do. Okay. Well, I think we got to know a little bit more about Randsburg today. Thank you so much.